Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this edition of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with our lecturer of the day, it's Adrien Tirtiaux. For those of you who don't know Adrien, he is working and living in Antwerp, and he studied architecture, and afterwards he studied sculpture and performance. And I know Adrien, or we know each other already for some years, but what I find so interesting about his work that it's mainly site-specific, or always connected to the location, to the situation, to the context. And Adrien works autonomously, but sometimes he also works in a collective. The collective HOTEL CHARLEROI that he co-founded. His work is also quite well spread, I think I can say. He showed work in Marta Herford, in the Middelheim. Now he recently had a presentation, or it's maybe still going on, at the MUCA. So yeah, I'm very happy to give the word now to Adrien to explain a bit more of his practice.
Okay, thank you, Léon, and hello everybody. I'm Adrien Tirtiaux. So I think Léon made the main introduction. Basically, I studied architecture and engineering in Louvain-la-Neuve. And then I decided I would be more interested to do arts. I actually studied 2 or 3 days at the academy in Antwerp after my architecture studies with Fred Bervoets. And then I decided it was not exactly what I was looking for. And then I ended up in Vienna at the Academy of Fine Arts there. And I studied 5 years over there. And then I met my life partner that was working in fashion and found work in Antwerp. So I did arrive in Antwerp at the end, and that's where I'm living since 10 years. So I will start to share the screen to see a bit how I work, or to show you an overview of projects. Here it is. Do you see the PDF? Yeah. So we'll present a series of projects. Maybe there is a lot. I will try to keep an eye on the hour, or if it's too long, Léon, you should not hesitate to tell me to go further or interrupt me. If there are questions, don't hesitate to interrupt or to raise a hand or something. I tried to kind of order the talk in 4 chapters, which can be like different threads to see my work. Probably all the projects could be ordered in one of these, in many of these chapters, but I try to structure it a bit. So the first chapter is in situ. And I always start with the same project, which is a project I did still as a student. It was a residency in a gallery in Groningen in the Netherlands. And we were invited by 2 Dutch artists to for a residency in the gallery. We would live there and work in public space, create artworks there. And they had built these beautiful cabins for 8 artists to sleep in the gallery. It was interesting, but it was raining all the time, so we were stuck inside, and the architecture of the cabins was not without remembering Big Brother, which was the TV shows that were coming to life at that period, or the Dutch urbanism, which has to deal with the same issues of not much space and how to deal rationally with space. my reaction was, after 3 weeks of residency, to dismantle my sleeping cabin, and I rebuilt it on the other side of the gallery, basically just outside on the canal. And I said I will just escape and let myself drift towards the sea. So it was still a sleeping cabin, like my bed was there, but I added some other functionalities: a toilet that you could just open in the floor, a radio, and the Almanac of the Skipper, which was a book that actually allowed me legally to make a bit what I want on the water. So it was quite interesting to find a free space there to intervene in public space. So some picture follow of this little cabin in the nature, which of course happens to be also a little white cube, and a commentary on the art coming outside the white cube into the nature. The white cube being the description or the name for the gallery space. I had a key. It took a long time, but I could go out with my cube, open bridges to be able to pass and continue my little journey. At the end, I never reached the sea. I think it was also not that important, but I had like 10 days of journey on the sea, on the canal, and this process and the encounters that were connected with it were probably much more important than the purpose in itself. A year later, it was also the time where Bastiaan Ader, the Dutch artist, got rediscovered. So that project that I actually made a bit as a student got some attention. And so a year later, I had the opportunity to exhibit in what is now my gallery in Vienna. Not in the main space of the gallery, but in the cellar, where there was a project space for young artists. And it's not an easy space. It's far from being a white cube. This weird structure in the space that is actually the basement of an elevator. So each time there is a show in the exhibition, people wonder, is that a sculpture? What is it? It's always a bit the disturbing element. So I thought, why not really make it a sculpture? And I proposed just to paint it with a bit of green, a bit of brown. It became a tree. And I opened the windows of the gallery and put a big mirror in the courtyard that's 45 degrees. So when you went down in the cellar, you were confronted with daylight and a surprising kind of simile-natural environment. So I always see it a bit as the opposite of the first project, where the white cube goes in the nature. Here, the nature kind of comes in the white cube. It also shows how I like to intervene in spaces, like either outside or here within a gallery. I always try to react with the space and find a story that goes with the space, or that the space is already telling. This is another example in Antwerp, 2013. That was Lokaal 01. Very nice residence and exhibition space that we had here. It's basically a former garage, so not so much to tell, white walls. But as a lot of artists, I got interested by the few characteristics that makes that it's not really a white cube. In the space here, the garage, the pit where people used to repair cars. I used like a lot of other artists there, and I started to connect this pit with one of the skylights above. both rectangles have approximately the same surface, and it came together in quite a nice shape. This volume was then painted with actually the color of the carpet in the entrance. So everything came from the space somehow, and creates this volume that you would discover as you come in the space. When you turn around it, then you discover what it actually is, and it's a staircase that allows you to, again, to escape a bit the white cube and find yourself on the roof of the space, where you have this wonderful, or very banal, but in a way wonderful view that we know in Belgium when we are inside a house block, just the backside of what happens, the coterijen, the multiple annexes and things that are built quite anarchically there. So this brings me to another project where I continued working on the same thematic. Here the context is we are in Leuven. It was in 2016. The context is the 500th anniversary of Utopia. That's the book in which the term Utopia was defined. It was Museum M and the university. They asked artists to make an intervention exhibition about what means Utopia today. And I was quite free to find a site to talk about Utopia, and I stumbled on this view in the city park, where you have a quite low wall and the backside of an entire street is visible. And for me, Utopia has always something a bit totalitarian. You have somebody with a very philanthropic idea that thinks this is the ideal world in which everybody should live. And it can be ideal for the person who thinks of it, but not necessarily for the people living in it. In a way, the Belgian structure is, as we can do, quite a good compromise. On the front side of the street, everything is quite in order and according to collective rules. On the back, everybody has also his own freedom to do a bit what he wants, or used to have that freedom. And as long as my neighbor doesn't bother me, I won't bother my neighbor. And I do think it is a kind of utopia, architectural utopia as well. So with this site that I chose, I started to take contact with all the inhabitants of the street, putting some flyers in the letterbox, ringing the bells. And I proposed them quite a simple idea. I said I would like to build a sculpture that would have one part in the city park and one part in their garden. Like metaphorically, it would be, actually not only metaphorically, like it would be literally supported both by the public domain and then by private contributions. So the sculpture took its inspiration from the continuous monument from Super Studio, a quite fascinating critical utopian project. And to motivate the inhabitants to participate, because they would maybe not do it only for the sake of art, I also proposed them that they could use the sculpture also in a functional way, like using it as a terrace or as a garden shed or as anything that they could need. My idea was that then from a kind of strict plan, the structure would just like take the shape of whatever needs or desires or individualities the people would express. So at some spots it's worked only a bit. Basically here we have an extension for a terrace that's where the neighbors were not really up for collaborating or stepping in the project. But I did manage to connect something like 15 houses through this weird structure that doesn't have so much to do anymore with Super Studio, but in a way is like the result of the encounters with and the needs of all inhabitants. So the sculpture was public. From the park, you could take this ramp that would lead you above the wall. And there was a bit of a game with privacy. Here we have some private terraces that were situated a bit above to show that it's another level. It was really nice because one of the inhabitants really wanted to make his garden public, so they could. The part of the parcours was to go down in the little courtyard of a house and having there a little exhibition made by Bernard, this inhabitant, about the history of the park. Then at some places, there were just big screens going around the gardens because there was no dialogue possible with the inhabitants. And in a way, it was a bit perverse from my side because even though they didn't want to participate, they participated in a way that it made also the structure interesting, that in this utopia, everybody can also really decide not to take part of it. And so on. It was also, here we have a little bridge that goes over a bush, like it was a bit of a style exercise of how to build architecture empirically, progressively, from one neighbor to the other. It also ended like this.
Adrien, can I ask you something?
Yes.
For how long did this work stay at this location, or is it a permanent work, or was it temporarily?
It was for 2 months, and I think this is 2 years after. So the interesting thing is that the exhibition was 2 months, and we dismantled the whole part in the park. Mm-hmm. But of course, the rest of the work was ownership of the inhabitants, so they were free to decide to keep their structure.
Yeah.
And I think now there is less remaining, but for some years it stayed like this. And it's even one of the inhabitants was a lawyer, and he said, you know what, if you sign our terraces, it will be an artwork and not an illegal terrace. So that's the way you deal with things in Belgium.
Okay, thank you.
It was also very nice that one of the inhabitants used actually the stairs that I did for his own renovation and construction. So it was always a kind of a lively mess. This is the model that I showed recently at Otty Park, showing that I actually used Lego blocks for the inhabitants to express me what kind of will they had. So we are in chapter 2 now. That is a bit introduced by this last project. I think it's about this empirical character I was talking about, not having an open scenario, started something without really knowing what will be the end result, and taking decisions by building, actually. This is a beautiful sketch by Le Corbusier, where he compares the Roman Pantheon at the same scale with Notre Dame de Paris, built 1,500 years later. So basically, to achieve the same height, it needed 1,500 years and a huge bricolage activity of reinforcing. It breaks, it reinforce, and only reinforcements, which Le Corbusier sees really as a kind of decay of civilization. I put this into perspective with an extract from La Pensée Sauvage, I don't know if it's the wild thinking. It's La Pensée Sauvage in French from Claude Lévi-Strauss, where he compares the way of thinking of the engineer and the way of thinking of the bricoleur. The engineer working with structures to achieve like an event, something like a wow effect. And the bricoleur, it's also like a way of thinking which is completely valid. It's like he finds something, and then that there is the wow effect, and from that thing that he found, he makes structures. And what Lévi-Strauss says is that these two ways of thinking are not hierarchical. They are just two separate paths, and the artist would be somewhere in between. So one thing I really like is to make structures of engineers, but with the means of a bricoleur. And the project in Saint-Nicolas, the bridge I built, is probably the best example of it. It was for Coup de Ville in 2013. I had the opportunity to work with this beautiful brutalist building, which is a school. And I said to Steph, the organizer of the show, would like to build a bridge, but reinforcing it as I'm building it, like always trying to go a step further until I reach the other side of the street. So in this concrete building, I built this structure, on which then came a second bridge on the bridge. Then came a third structure to help going further. And it finally looked like this. I didn't have to go by just doing a step forward. I was on the other side of the street. Coming from a school, it has been seen also metaphorically as the way you build up a career by always trying to reinforce things just to go a little bit further. The funny thing about the project was that, of course, people could not use it, but to stay as a sculpture, the city asked that an engineer at the end calculates what I have built, and we had to do this, and we received like a 30-page PDF with equations and so on, and it was fine, but the study cost as much as the work, so it was quite a funny story. So when I build sculptures, often they are also kind of prototypes or tests or growing sculptures, things that don't necessarily have a hand, but an end, but set up a way of construction or conceptual thinking. This on the right, the picture is so it's called Prototype for an Endless Column. It's basically the idea for a column that would just continue growing if you continue pouring. The formworks are integrated. You can always stack them on top of each other and pour further concrete. But you also have a phenomenon of decay, because the more you go up, the more the sculpture will collapse on its base, and at the end it will be between its fabrication and its ruins at the bottom. That sculpture I first made in Sao Paulo during a residence in Brazil. A few months later, I tried to go bigger and make it really a column. It was not completely successful, but it's created, the idea was still there. This is a sketch now, some years later, for I'm working now for a big sculpture in Louvain-la-Neuve. It's not completely signed yet, so let's take it as a sketch or a proposal. Here it will be quite interesting to have the dialogue with the sculpture and the building, which has a similar, at least a similar look of plates connected, like kind of S. And the building is a bank. It's a building for ING. So here the infinite column will have a kind of commentary on the idea of infinite growth that we know from capitalism. So I'm looking forward to see how this will evolve. We stay in concrete. It's maybe a bit less empirical here, but I connect the idea of working one step after the other, also with a performative thing. So here it's a sculpture which is really, which comes out from a performance, and I realized it in Nantes on the Ile de Nantes. It was a former industrial. It was a former industrial harbor of Nantes. When I was there 15 years ago, it was full of industrial ruins. It was super beautiful. Then I came there 5 years ago for this project, and it was fully built, fully designed. And I was missing somehow the ruins, and I proposed to realize the Queen of Ruins. It would be a sculpture that we would celebrate, and on the day of the celebration, it would be already a ruin. So we poured concrete on the floor, and concrete was connected with a counterweight, a big wooden formwork in which concrete came. When we took out the formwork, it looked like this, but we kept the part of the formwork supporting the back part. And the opening of the sculpture was basically a performance. We just set on fire the former formwork and wait that the sculpture raises in the fire. We had no idea if it would work, because again, that was without an engineer or anything. But it was very exciting because a lot of people helped to realize it and were looking forward to see how will it work and how. So it did work, just had to help it a little bit on the end. And stood then like this with a height of 6 meters, I think, in this environment of, as we see here in the background, like very new buildings and architecture. So that's the class where I studied in Vienna was called Performative Bildhauerei, like performative sculptures, and I do like to think that these two terms really can work together. Sometimes I also do really performances, but again connected a lot with constructed things. This was an installation at Marion de Canière in Antwerp, where I put a nail in the floor. And between this nail and the wall, I stuck a beam. Between that beam and the next wall, another beam was stuck, and so on. Like basically the whole structure, a spiral in the space, was only holding together through this hole, through this nail. It could have worked with one beam less or one more, or you could continue the spiral. It's just a matter of when you decide that it's finished. And here the installation was connected with a performance on the last day, where I would dismantle in 1 second 10 days of work by removing the nail. I was very happy that everything went fine, as we can see. Here we are in Charleroi, a city where I have worked a lot. As Léon said, I have founded a collective called HOTEL CHARLEROI, and we invited more than 100 artists over 5 years to work there in Charleroi, to create site-specific works in public space. It's a bit of a past story, though, and I think it's the subject of another lecture, so I will not talk about it, but I would like to show work that I realized there, in which this empirical performative aspect comes to light again. Charleroi is this very modern city surrounded by industry and by remains of industry. So you have all these artificial mountains, the terrils, or slag heaps in English, that are the result of coal extraction. And they are in a way not really connected with the center. It's hard to find the ways to go on one of these hills from the center. So I observed in Charleroi that a lot of creativity or energy of young people is spent through vandalism, and I thought maybe it's interesting to use vandalism as a mean to really create something constructive. And I set myself as a goal to create a direct way between a little park close to the city center and the Terril des Piges, one of the biggest of these coal hills, by breaking up nature and two walls situated in private terrains that were in the way. And I started at the foot of the Terril by breaking a first wall, and in the woods I created this straight line with a kind of black carpet inviting to go on the Terril. I actually never could finish the job because I started to have conversation and arguments with the neighbors that were reproaching me by breaking walls, letting prostitutes and hobos and people coming closer to their place. I was rather thinking that by bringing maybe another public there, maybe the other populations would go somewhere else. But it's a whole story that I also will not detail here. But basically, I left the intervention as where I was. I had worked several nights to take out bricks, brick after brick from the second wall, which would make a direct access to the park. And it stayed, the whole stayed in this shape, still in a way that that people could take it and go directly through to the Terril. Now, this is a picture taken 10 years after, last autumn, and the hole is still there. It's a bit bigger. There is a little white and a red stripe next to it. It has become part of a GR, like of a big hiking trail connecting all the Terril, the slag heaps of Charleroi. Beautiful path, and it's quite interesting because something that has been here made completely illegally with no money, with nothing, turns out to become a permanent work. The passage is used every day, and it has been even renamed by the locals La Porte d'Adrien, the Gate of Adrien. So it's always a very nice story to tell. Yeah, about how you never know how things evolve. Now we are in Den Haag in the Netherlands. It's another very important project, I guess, for me. This performative empirical dynamic is also very present here. It was in 2012, and it was the year before the big budget cuts would come in the Netherlands. So a lot of people were talking about it. The government decided to cut 25% in all areas of culture that year. So it was really a strong cut. And I was invited in Stroom to make an intervention that would go over the course of 2-3 months of an exhibition, but that would evolve over the course of the exhibition. It was a festival called Expanded Performance. And I responded to the invitation by sending a letter to all the employees of Stroom. And I introduced myself, and I explained them that I would like to build a structure inside the whole art institution that would be a kind of slope and would cut 25% of their working space, of the space of Stroom. It was called the Great Cut. So I would start in the kitchen, and over the course of the exhibition, all the people would have to move their stuff, their desk, to go above this structure. I got very angry reactions and very like it was a hot thing, and of course people, the employees told me, but who are you to come and tell us to move all our stuff where we are already busy with these cuts and we have to deal with them. But on the other hand, they also said, actually through my proposal, they started to talk really about what will happen, about the budget cuts, about the way the institution will be restructured. And so they were also a bit thankful. So they proposed me to come to Den Haag and discuss further with them what I did. And I proposed them a compromise, basically, like in my first drawing, I would just cut 25%. I think it became 21% because Strom was concerned with, but I would just cut 21% of the space with a straight cut, and everything which would be out of the way would have to move. The compromise was that we could possibly change the direction of the cut, that if something is not possible to move in the way, the cut could go another way as long as it takes 21% of the 21% of space away in section. And they allowed me to start for a week, and then we would see what happened. And after a week, they were actually also pleased of the work and the way it interacted with their daily life, and the real cut, the real budget cut, that it turned out to be to be very easy to work there. So I started in the place where they had lunch, where they were able to have lunch on an oblique table. Some employees I had to move higher because some others didn't move, so it created some kinds of different platforms and on different heights. Some had to live in this kind of environment. It was interesting because the discussions that we had, like I would always go on Friday night to Den Haag, discuss with the people concerned by the next step of my intervention, how do we want to do it? And then according to that, on Saturday, Sunday, during the weekend, I would just move their desk, build the part of the installation, and they would come back on Monday and have a new working desk. And but all the connections all the discussions were connected with problems that you encounter in real restructuring of companies. And so for example, we had a discussion about the toilets, because the women's toilets were obviously much more affected than the men's toilet. So we had a gender discussion that came in the picture, and I proposed first to make like an equal cut for everybody, that everybody would have to go down to go to the toilet. But then they suggested maybe you just do it like you want, and the women will go to the men's toilet, and that's how we were working basically. Arno, the director, wanted to be also involved in the project, so I represented him surfing on the huge wave, and I tried to make nice connections between spaces and to create a relatively smooth wave, although it was always depending on what we would encounter. At the end, the most difficult probably was to work with the artist, and it was much harder to try to move their piece or to intervene on them. This little fold is what I managed to do here. So the project, I'm still super happy of it, because I think it really, beyond the artistic part, it really helped all the employees of Strom to go on with the institution, with the crisis they would have to face. So we ended the project by dismantling everything together, and we made a barbecue with a little wood. It was very nice. I come to my third chapter, which is in theory the half of the. Do you think it's too long, or is it okay, Leon?
Well, we're now already 7:15 to 8.
Mhm.
So maybe, I mean, it's very interesting, I think. Yeah. So for me, you can continue, but maybe you have to speed up a little bit.
Okay.
Still need some time for questions or.
Okay.
Okay, no. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I can pass some projects. So the way I connected in Strom a physical structure, a way of building with real budget cuts is something I do quite often. This sculpture here, which looks very abstract, is actually a representation of the political structure of Belgium. It's a structure under tension, and in a way, in the sculpture, every parliament we have in Belgium is represented by a different color. So Flanders, the region of Flanders is the black tube, the Walloon region is the red one, Brussels is the yellow one, and they are connected together with the language parliaments, Brussels with Wallonie, etc. At the end, we have a kind of system that you don't really know how it holds, and if you cut any of these cables, it just collapses. But it's also on actually on tension because of the weight of Flanders in the balance. So I think the system can be the echo of another situation that comes from another field, like cultural or political, economical. This is a project I did in Marta Herford 4 years ago. Marta Herford is this museum built by Frank Gehry in Herford, a kind of UFO there. The show I was invited to was about Gerrit Rietveld, and I had a bit of a carte blanche to propose intervention in space talking about Rietveld. I got very interested in one constructive node, actually, like the joint that is now called the Rietveld joint, is the way three woods come together to create a connection. In the chair, it's used everywhere, and it was a kind of a revolution, or people say that this joint is in a way revolutionary, as instead of having a joint that would create a closed space under the chair, it allows the space to extend, and the chair can really be part of a bigger space. So I decided to work with this joint and to take it quite literally by building a structure made of hundreds, thousands of these joints that would grow so much that at one point it would distort the walls of the museum itself. So it created this structure. Obviously, these are the walls of the museum because it's a museum by Frank Gehry, but it created an interesting encounter between the architecture of Gehry and the ideas of Rietveld. Now I jump to the Middelheim, where it was, maybe some of you know the sculpture which is standing there. Again, we have actually a topic, like I'm often invited either with a specific space or with a specific topic, or both, because that's a bit the way I work, is to react and propose something really according to topic and space. In the Middelheim, I was first invited to actually make a work in front of the Kasteel, connected with the new bar that I made there on the terrace. And it was a very complicated process because the bar was not ready. The topic was the context was the big exhibition they made about Baroque 3 years ago. So I started looking after cupolas and the connection between heaven and earth that happens in Baroque architecture. And after a while, it became clear that it was easier to leave that site and work directly in the park. And I proposed here also actually a way of building, and that this way of building would participate to the content of the work. And that's how we ended up pouring concrete in the ground. This is the model that I did, and you can see that it's a pop-up. Basically, concrete which is poured in the ground, raises, and creates a hanging structure. So this is how the sculpture looked after a few weeks of production. The pillars are connected with hinges that are connected with foundations. The earth that has been removed from the foundation is used as a cast for the pillars. So there was some kind of everything found its place, with only adding concrete and steel to make the sculpture. So it literally comes from the sides, and it also literally makes the connection between earth and heaven that I wanted to talk about Baroque architecture. These are a few pictures of the raising of the sculpture and the sculpture as it is now, and it actually gets old quite good now after 3 years. Another concrete project that I've been working on last summer is it's in Zwevegem. It's a site called Transfo. It's a former power plant that is now rehabilitated for different kind of functions. It has a very ambitious master plan. I was invited to make a sculpture for a kind of fietsenparcours, that with a bike people go around, and there are like some kind of 15 artworks around the region of Kortrijk. And as the site of Transfo was before a power plant, it's a bit isolated from the rest of the village. I thought it's interesting to create a new connection, a new access to the space, and quite soon this idea of making a bridge using a pillar, an old chimney, came to light. It turned out that after asking some engineers that it was in a way impossible to do it that way, and that it would be possible to do it by faking it, and also still it would need calculations, and if you do calculation, then it's maybe more interesting to make a permanent bridge, because you do need an engineer and everything. So why make something that will be destroyed after 3 months if we could go for a real bridge? So I thought, okay, that sounds good, and I managed to convince the organizer of the exhibition and the people of Transfo to have a bit more budget to make a permanent work. And here also the constructive system is a kind of commentary on the context. It's actually both bridges that I propose are hanging top down, which is in urbanism, when something is top down, is decided by higher level and imposed to the people, which you oppose to bottom-up urbanism, where initiatives from inhabitants and communities lead to a decision. Here I thought my work as a structure hanging top down, but at the same time leaving space for greenery and vegetation to grow bottom up through the bridge. We built a formwork. We poured concrete in it to make a 20-meter long beam. We numbered every single piece of the beams we used for the formwork, uncast the beam. Then a huge crane came and placed it on the spot. It's basically the basement of an old structure that was unused and now became a door for the bridge. And then we rebuilt the wood that we used for the formwork to make the actual path people are walking on when they are walking on the bridge, with only one every second beam. And this is the result, basically. Like the impression by going on the bridge is interesting because from below you actually arrive to the water. The canal is above there. And from this side, it's probably more architectonic. From this side, it really looks like a sculpture, as if the beam would just be uncast and come out of its shell in a way. This is a picture in autumn. This is a picture in winter, and we will see next spring when things starts to grow in it, how it continues to evolve. We arrived to the last chapter. I wanted to say a word because I know it's an aspect of my work that maybe sometimes people understand less. Maybe some of you know my books, which are made as a series, and each new book is like another album in the format of a Tintin album, 64 pages, and they work like the narration, the narrative, comic narrative. So myself, I grew up with comics, basically. That's really my cultural background, as for many of us Belgians. I think on the left we have a comic that I made with 7 or 8 years old. This is a fanzine that I made when I was a teenager. When I was at university, I drew story about drinking people. Like I realized, like some years ago, I started to archive all the comics that I've done in my life, and I realized how they work as a kind of autobiography. They are connected with each period of my life, and even if sometimes I'm not the character, it's obviously a kind of portrait of myself. This on the right side, we have a kind of diary that I was doing when I was a student in Vienna. And so after a point, when I was studying in Vienna, I started to also integrate this practice in my art. So by using comics to document performances or artworks, or as part of a thinking process. My graduate work in Vienna was a comic. I still use it in that way, like maybe some people saw in the last exhibition I had in Otty Park in Antwerp, where I told about a collaboration with Le Magasin Grenoble in the format of a comic. Or maybe in the MUCA, some people saw these editions, which are comics that are related to projects as a synopsis, scenario, as a documentation, as an inspiration. Like with every project, there is often some kind of narrative in sequence that is related. And so my archive of autobiographical or comics is growing and growing still every year. Sometimes I use it in a more conceptual way. This was a contribution for Gagarin, this magazine where artists make contributions without images. Here, for them, I developed a comic of 8 pages in total, where I would make a story with only black images from other comics, and I quite liked it in the way that even though there is no image, through the voice and the way and the typography of the people speaking, you can recognize who speaks or who, which is, I guess, the idea of Wilfried Ruet von Gagarin about artists telling something without showing images. Comic is also an inspirational source from time to time. I have fun, like this little sculpture is amelioration of actually an invention by Gaston Lagaffe, Gust Flaters. Like he designed a machine to put one nail in the wall. The only problem is that you have to hang it with 2 nails. So my model has 2 hammers, so it can put 2 nails in the wall, and you hang it with only 1 nail, and it creates a quite nice wall drawing of failed attempts on the wall. I also use often the language of comic for exhibitions. I will not talk about this one, but it was a solo show at ikob, where I played with the German way of saying an artwork. In German, you often says, ich habe eine Arbeit gemacht. So it's a work, basically, or a labor, and the show was called The 12 Labors of Adrien Tirtiaux, and basically there were 12 artworks, which were each of them a labor for the show. So here the title and became the thread through the whole exhibition in this reference. And there are only 2 more projects to go, so we're almost there. I wanted to show this one because I think it's one of the most complex attempts I did with playing with the structure and language of graphic novels and comics in art. It's a show that I did in my gallery in Vienna in 2010. Actually, in 2009, I had made an application to enter at the HISC because I was about to come back to Belgium, and I thought I need to learn to know people there in Belgium. And I was not accepted, and I heard afterwards that it was mostly because I had put some comics in my portfolio and that this would not go together with art. And of course, instead of stopping it, I thought I just have to do it more consequently and to go deeper in that. And I made this exhibition called Le Pouvoir de l'Ellipse, in which every artwork was basically like the panel of a comic story. So they, like in a comic story, they should be nice for themselves, but they would start to make sense in the succession of artwork and in the dialogue with other things. So this was the work list, like the A4 sheet with the plan and the titles that you get when you enter the gallery. It was this comic, and it worked. It was a story. It was a Western. When you entered the gallery, you arrived on this big panel with Lucky Luke showing the salt desert. Then you would go in the next space with the ceiling painted yellow, and realizing in a way you are yourself in the salt desert. There was a black painting hanging, which is called an improbable meeting between Adrien and André Franquin. Let's say both masters for me. Adrien being known for his black square paintings, but having also done a lot of comics, and Franquin being a genius artist in the comic field. And so I wanted to make a black square by just darkening the sheet of paper with ink, like Franquin used to do it for his skies and stories. He was quite depressive and would just spend hours just making sheets black. I spent too much time on this. Basically, from that black picture, there would be again a comic panel with a black sky, telling that the night has fallen, and so on. Like all the works had to work for them and then be also related with the story. I will just show the ending because I think it's quite nice. The public would just go up in the gallery. There is this slide projector showing always the same slide of a cowboy waiting for a duel. And actually, by going up yourself the stairs, you realize that you are the opponent in the duel. Then you arrive at the top of the stairs. There was just a smoking cigarette on a pedestal, which could be the ending of a duel. And a half-round window became the opportunity to put a big plexiglass and make the sunset where every Lucky Luke story always ends. Of course, it was not only about this Western story of a cowboy lost in the desert and having a duel at the end. It was also trying to say something about my situation towards the white cube being the soul desert, or towards creation in general. What do you do? How does creation takes place? And then how by a chain of elements you start to load it with a narrative. So the exercise of having work that could work on themselves, then a story, plus that this story also makes sense on a more metaphorical level, let's say, made the exhibition very complex, but also very nice. I think a lot of people loved it, but impossible to sell also. But it's an experiment that I really enjoyed doing. And in a way, I think, of course, it was telling things about the language of comic as we know it visually, but what also interests me a lot is how comics is related to architecture. So the main art in comic is basically to organize your sequences, your panels on your sheet of paper. If you have always the same panel, then it's like cinema. Every sequence is the same. But by making bigger panels, by playing with the tension that comes when you turn the page, that's how a good comic drawer managed to achieve tension, dramaturgy, and at the same time, and basically express time with space. And this has a lot of common points with architecture and the way we perceive space. Here in the gallery, all the tension moments were in staircase or in doors, in transition moments where you would always arrive in the next space and then discover a new installation or a new thing. And this is something that I pay a lot attention to when I'm working and creating installations. So I show a last project that I did last summer that has not much to do with comic, besides maybe that it's a flashy color. But I think it does discover itself or talks of space in this kind of sequential way that the comic character, how a comic works. So it's in a small street in Liège. It was for the Triennale d'Art Public, like a kind of biennial in public space. And it's a yellow object that is on the top of a garage building, parking building, facing a church. So from the street, you only encounter the object, and the public is invited to take the lift and go up the roof of the building. To go on the roof, you pass by the 6th floor, and there you can understand where the color comes from. It's there is an installation by Adrien Tirtiaux, an artist who we actually decided to kind of work in dialogue for this exhibition. So he manipulated the lights of the parking so that any yellow object in the parking becomes red, any gray objects can become pink. It's a quite bluffing effect. And so the lights were regulated in a way that the object would constantly turn from yellow to red or pink. And he also gave me the color so that the paint he fabricated himself so that the effect could work optimally. Arriving on the roof, there is this quite surreal view where the church of Saint-Jean is raising above the parking, and you find out that the object is a little staircase. And this staircase then brings you to an experience that you can do yourself. So here we have also a performative aspect, is to go yourself above the void, but the way to the void is kind of reducing as far as you go and also going a slope. So it was a pretty interesting spatial experience, and it was very, very nice to see how only with analog means, like just an object like this, you can really work on emotions by people. There was some kind of vertigo connected with the work. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrien. It was very very nice to see the whole collection, this whole body of work. Was also for me the first time to see everything together. It was very interesting. Is there anyone who has a question for Adrien?
Yeah, can I ask something?
Of course.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Adrien, for the dinner. It was so nice. I know it's just something that came from my mind, like this performative that you talked about. I quite also kind of have a reaction on it during your talk, because you're talking also about engineer, I mean, the calculations that comes with the art piece as itself when you have to dialogue with the production of it. I mean, sometimes you have to prove it like by calculating the structure that it is possible to stand as itself. And in the other side, the performative comes against it in the way that one thing feeds the another thing. I mean, there's certain of relation that is, I don't know if you ever made like any work with this calculus or with this fake calculus, because it's something that came from my mind, because it's in your work there is this kind of reality also. I mean, a really reality that it's about physics, that it's really brings the work to the ground. But at the same time the engineer also maybe plays with this idea that is sometimes not possible to calculate everything. And I think that your works bring this in a really conscious way, you know, it's not possible to calculate everything. And I think this performative thing that you do, it's a kind of really ironic thing. I think. I don't know, it's, for me it's really strong work between this and the comics also, because it really reminds me the diagrams and the architecture diagrams, I think. Yeah, and somehow, I don't know.
Thank you, nice. Yeah, in a way, I think it's only recently that I really started to work with engineers. Like until now, like until maybe 3-4 years ago, I would just make it intuitively and see myself if it holds or not. More like this kind of bricoleur that wants to achieve engineer goals. Because I talk about this duality between the bricoleur and the engineer. now I have bigger projects where I have to work with an engineer, and indeed I think it would be nice to make engineer works that look like bricoleur works. That's probably a very interesting development for future things. I also start to have good collaborations with engineer where we kind of think together also of how this could be done and also like this. And I think it's nice because it opens also still fields to discover or to go further. Does it answer the question?
No, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Questions for Adrien? Heide, it feels like you want to ask something.
Yes, I have to unmute myself. Hi, Adrien. Thank you for the lecture. Just a very pragmatic question for the last project you showed, like where you walk down the vertical. This rain did collect in there, right? Was that a problem?
No, there was as it was going downwards, the rain would just gather in the top, and I left a little open space so that it worked like a gargouille, actually. I don't know the English name, like what you have on Notre Dame de Paris, like these animals that spit rain outside.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I can imagine that it was really like a strange walking experience. And the other point I wanted to ask is kind of, or not to ask, just to mention that the ways of how you the collaborative aspect, so to say, it's very I like how open you go into situations and then respond to what you find, and that's I enjoy that a lot. Mm-hmm. That's not a question.
Thank you. No, I think it's part of the site. Like when you want to do work and there are people there, often you have to think that it's interesting to use the architecture, but people are also resources, people that can help you, that have interesting, and so it's always an encounter with the site, but also with the people. And then I have people I keep on building things with, but it's often also very different building teams, because according to the situation, it's more interesting to make this building team or this one or this one, and it's actually all part of okay, what is the most appropriate for the site? What does it ask for?
Yeah.
Okay, then I think we're finished. Thank you.
But so we are on time. I was speeding up all the time because I thought.
We still have 15 minutes left. No. Thank you very much. And then maybe we invite you maybe next year in our studio again, like we did a couple of years ago. If you would be interested, it would be nice maybe to have a half a day in the studio.
It's always nice to follow the students and to see the juries also.
Because I think there's also something going on in our studio that connects very well to what you are doing, everyone. And we see each other very soon. Good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Adrien.